Well, hello. It is the post-Christmas special edition of Torn Tuesday, and it's actually Sunday. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ongoing in-depth commentary of Howard Shore's wonderful music scores for the Lord of the Rings trilogy of films. Here at the OneRing.net, we had previously done the Hobbit score for that whole trilogy, with our special guests who are joining us now as we continue to The Two Towers, the second installment of The Lord of the Rings. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the book that I read as an 11-year-old child. Here we are. And this is the 4K ultra high def that I am watching at the right older age of. Anyways, hello, welcome. That's Jim J. Ware right there. And there's Doug Adams right there. Give a shout to the audience, my friends.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
It's lovely to have you. I hope you guys
Nice
had
to
a
be here.
wonderful and uneventful holiday. So far, so good. Yes?
So far, so good. Exactly right.
Excellent. So everybody get your disc ready. If you are watching along with the Apple iTunes version, it doesn't matter if you're watching with a regular DVD or a regular Blu-ray, put your disc in for the Two Towers Extended Edition Part 2. There will be a countdown clock. So any of the wonderful folks who are joining along with us later on in the broadcast, they will be able to fast forward and go to exactly the time code that we will have on display right here for everyone. Sound good? Everybody ready?
That's part one, Cliff.
Entirely ready.
A refreshing beverage. Thank you, Brita, filtered water. And we have the disc in, and I have prepared it. We have cued the film. Hold on. No, don't tell me that my device has no signal. Don't tell me that. Okay, well, I have to restart my player. How about that? So let's just talk very quickly, folks, about the wonderful musical expansion of the world of Lord of the Rings, where Howard Shore is introducing us to such an exciting new vista of musicality, just as Peter Jackson is introducing us to new cultures and new places. Go.
Well, this one is really the film and the score that opens up the world of Middle-earth, I think it's probably fair to say that Fellowship is, in a way, a self-contained story, even though it sort of has a cliffhanger ending, almost literally. But this is where we take everything that was set up in Fellowship. If you want to think of Fellowship as almost being the expositional chapter of this story, and you get into the Two Towers, and suddenly all these characters and their themes are pressed up against other thematic ideas. And one of the great ways to highlight interesting musical qualities of themes is sort of show their opposite. And that's very much how Howard Shore operates, especially in the Lord of the Rings music. He always says that he was composing along the map. You've shown the music of the North, so you must show the music of the South, which reflects upon the music of the North and makes it sound different, the East and the West. And all these different regions and different eras of Middle Earth. This is what gives the music so much of its historical content, is to not only see what it is, but to see what it's not. So it's really where we take the groundwork that's been laid in Fellowship and begin to offer these contrasts and these developments. And the story gets considerably more complicated in terms of its musical content. Jim, I think you were doing a little quick math before we started today. So there's maybe about 25 new thematic ideas in this score, right?
It probably is. Yeah, it probably is about 20 to 25.
Yeah.
But just going back to what Doug was saying about the various sort of cultures involved, I mean, we've had a few hints of the Gondorian side of the world of men, and in this film we will encounter the Rohirrim and the world of Rohan, an entirely different culture within the world of men, and that's something that Howard Shore does throughout these scores. So instead of just giving you one elvish culture in Rivendell, you get two. You get the elves of Rivendell and you get the elves of Lothlorien. You will get two of everything to compare and contrast.
That's true. And some characters get multiple themes of their own as well, don't they?
Exactly. Many of the characters that we've already seen who already have their own themes attached to them get new material as well. Gollum is definitely one to listen out for, who gets two very distinct themes for the different sides of his personality, for the Smeagol side and the Gollum side.
And we got the pity theme a fair amount in Fellowship, but we didn't really see the amount of menace that Gollum can have as a character. So that comes out much more in Two Towers. We should probably say, Jim, also that we are trying to tackle people's questions as they come in today. I've opened up my DMs on Twitter, and I think Jim is monitoring a hashtag. So the hashtag is LOTR score questions. Is that right?
That is correct. My DMs are open as well, and I will try and keep an eye on those as well. Let me just get those open in another window.
There you go. I just did that myself. LOTR score questions as the hashtag. Now, gentlemen, we have the disc ready for all the folks at home. We're going to do a very quick countdown, and then everybody press play simultaneously. Then you'll all watch along as we continue this in-depth discussion. And God willing and the creek don't rise, we will have no technical problems with the playback on any of our devices. And it's a very Merry Christmas holiday weekend. Gentlemen, before we begin, let me say thank you for being here with us all, and with our families, with our extended families, actually, for all the fans and the ringers around the world who are very much aquiver with excitement about the fact that we get to share this wonderful energy and this erudite conversation about music and the beauty of cinema. Let's go. Countdown, ladies and gentlemen, in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and play. And here, out of the darkness, is the New Line Cinema logo. Everybody's watching along. We'll have an elapsed time clock going right below us on the graphic. Thank you, Justin, for helping us out. And here we go.
And again, using the History of the Ring theme for the Lord of the Rings title coming up here. My own memories of this was about the time that I was getting a little bit more trust from the production, from Warner Brothers and from Wingnut and all these wonderful people. So I was able to go to a press screening of this in Chicago about a month before it was in theaters, I think, give or take. And this is one of the very, very, very early press screenings. I think I was there with Roger Ebert and people like that, if you remember all those wonderful Chicago critics from back in the day. But it was at this point, and I'm trying to recall if I'd actually heard the music yet. I think I did have the recordings from this score. So I think I was familiar with the music, but of course, I think I didn't have everything. So getting into this part of the film, I think maybe this was not a piece they had shared with me. So I was trying to figure out why this all started to sound very familiar as we got inside these mountains. And as we'll notice in just a second here.
I remember on the original album, this had the slightly cryptic title, Foundations of Stone. And there was a lot of speculation about what this was actually music for.
And this is the part where audiences are stunned and happy that they got in their seats on time.
That's right.
Flash back to what happened at Fellowship of the Ring. And people start to gasp. They're not even aware of what's about to happen.
And we have a recap here with some alterations of the music that played in Moria for this exact scene. Although, in addition to the musical variations that we have, it's also performed by a different orchestra this time. This is part of the New Zealand sessions from Fellowship of the Ring. This is now being performed by the London Philharmonic. And these are all kind of beat for beat moments that were recapped from the first score, but this time it's going to keep going. We get to this amazing piece as Gandalf lets go, and the music kicks back up.
And we get not one, but two new choral texts.
Yes. We have the Abyss and the Fight, correct?
Correct. So the abyss is Adunaic, and the fight is in Quenya.
Really? A switch from Adunaic to the Quenya? Wow.
So a very bold choice in terms of the storytelling here. And in terms of the scoring, to really make this, I mean, this is about as operatic as you can get in terms of the scope of the score. I'm seeing something on Twitter. I can't tell if I'm getting questions or just people are following along. So we have this beautiful moment here where we kind of pull back into the cavern and everything goes into a 3-beat meter. And just a moment of I don't know, it's a nice way to sort of add a bit of poetry to a very violent scene without really letting up the tension. And then, of course, goes right into the Hobbit's awakening.
The last lyric there is Metana, so to the end.
That's right.
That is the epic clash of two Maiar spirits, one the servant of Morgoth, and one the servant of Manwë and Iluvatar, ultimately. And it's just such a metaphysically driven moment between these two powers.
We have our first little quote of the Rohan music here as well, with the Two Towers title cards. So similar to how the Fellowship card was met with a bit of the Fellowship theme, even though it was not a story element. Here we have another curtain opener, which is just a little bit of Rohan for the Two Towers.
For keen-eared listeners, there's the 4 notes we heard there are just a little hint of the evil times motif that's all over this.
That's right. That's right.
Indeed. And we're in a different opening with the extended version of the film.
That's right.
Let's take a moment and consider the absurdity of roast chicken. Right here.
Well, Sam's an optimist.
I love it. I love it so much.
We get some rabbit later on.
True, yeah. I mean, they could have encountered a chicken. It would have been very large compared to the Hobbits, though. Big chicken. So we have a bit of the clarinet again. It's a great stand-in, the same as it was for Fellowship, that as they get away from the Shire, they keep the theme, but the orchestration changes quite a bit. And the clarinet is just a little bit, I don't know, arguably sadder sounding on this theme or more wistful sounding on this theme. I think the whistle would have been a little too lively. Flute maybe a little bit too elegant. The clarinet just has a little bit more depth and a little bit more reflection to it. So it's a perfect instrument to sort of become the away from home instrument for the Shire theme.
As if there's more distance in memory of the place they've left behind.
Yeah, and also I think Howard wanted to keep a sense of the purity and the bucolic sense of that theme was saved for only in the Shire. That's the setting of the Shire theme that we usually call the pensive setting, more thoughtful, more reflective. And you hear there, again, it's that chord with the added second degree of the scale. So it's secundal harmonies, notes right next to each other. Howard was very careful about how dark things would get, musically speaking, to portray Mordor. He didn't want it to suddenly become very chromatic and very modern. So using that sort of old-fashioned harmony, that diatonic tonal harmony, but stacking things together very close like that seemed to work.
It gives it a sort of subtle presence rather than being too in your face.
Yes, exactly. There's our clarinet again.
So there is a slightly different version of some of this material on the complete recordings, and a longer version on the rarities, which is
Yes.
sort of a very bleak choral piece.
When we went back to do the complete recordings, and we ended up presenting both bits of this, or both versions of some of this music in this early part of the Two Towers. And I can remember asking Howard Shore, well, how do you want me to sort of describe the process of why there's two versions of this and why this happens to be here? And Howard, in a very fatherly manner, said, well, just tell them the truth. Just tell them how it works, which I thought was kind of a nice, an obvious thing to say, although in showbiz that's not always the case. But it was nice to have them say, just tell them the truth.
We should touch on that a bit more later, because for the first sort of reel or two of the Two Towers, there's 2 or 3 versions of everything.
Yeah.
We are not alone, and here comes a very important new piece of music, and for the audience, a lot of information.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So we mentioned in the Fellowship of the Ring that we had an instrument that we called the dulcimer. It's one of the instruments for the Shire, which is a sort of tabletop instrument with wires stretched across a frame. They tend to be diatonic, meaning just the notes of a single key at a time. That's usually how those are assembled. Here we go to its big brother, the cimbalum or the cymbalum, depending on how you prefer to pronounce that. But it is a larger instrument, Hungarian, more chromatic. So you can actually play, analogous to all of the notes on the piano, although the range is not quite the same. But that was a way to show Gollum's connection to his Hobbity past. It's a similar instrument that represents the Hobbits, so it's going to represent in a different form Gollum, and it also has that kind of wiry, twitchy feeling to it. You play with these little hammers, so everything is played in a sort of tremolo manner. So it's very shaky sounding, very textural, and it kind of works perfectly with Gollum's more menacing side. His Gollum side is not his Smeagol side, but his kind of evil, ring obsessed side that we see here. And of course, in these big, this is a big fight thing, a struggle thing. So this does not bring back something quite as sneaky as the cimbalum during that, but it did introduce his climb down the rock face there. And it's going to come back here in just a moment. Yeah, you can hear it right there. I'm not sure if it's audible in everybody's film mix, but
Audiences have not really seen Gollum full on like this since An Unexpected Journey, if you were watching all 6 films in order.
At that initial screening in Chicago, there were a lot of very confused faces at this point, because it wasn't so much, well, what's that effect? Well, who is that? Who looks like that? No one could quite figure out. We didn't have any digital characters that looked like this before Gollum, so people were very perplexed. How did this happen?
It's a much more convincing effect than I think anyone had seen prior to this.
Hugely so, I'd agree. Yeah, and especially because he's not, we'd seen stained glass and robots and liquid metal and water and things like that, but here we have flesh and bone, and it was fairly convincing. Now, great example here of using the ring theme. We're not seeing the ring yet, and he's not really using the word ring. We're talking about the precious, but the ring theme. There's the ring.
It's the ring theme with Gollum's instrumentation.
Yes, exactly right. Which is something Howard likes to do a lot, where you keep the color of one character but the theme of another. There's a little bit of that, very to a less degree, but with Bilbo starting to show some Gollum-like tendencies, there was a little bit of that going on as well.
Well, after a very long time, chronologically, this is the closest that Gollum has ever been to the ring again since Bilbo found it. And no wonder Howard immediately lets us clue into this music there.
Yeah.
It has brought Gollum through so much toil and torture and troubles for him to get this far, to get this close to the precious again.
Another little new theme there.
Yeah, a little bit of the Chimblum thing again, but a different line this time. Great little loping, traveling bit for Gollum. Gollum is so we noted one of the differences between Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit scores is that the Hobbit scores had a lot of character themes, whereas it's mostly places and cultures and objects and things like that. But this is an example where Gollum is such an important character and such an important piece of the storytelling that he does get his own thematic content. I love these kind of muted brass things going on here. But he does have that little connection to the hobbits at the same time. There's just a little bit of that, and as we mentioned, the chords from his pity theme are also going to tie into the Mount Doom music a little later in the story. So he's connected to a ton of things, but he is a character that gets character specific themes. And now we're getting into a composition titled Ugluk's Warriors.
Cool.
Which one's Ugluk?
I have no idea.
I was waiting for someone to admit it. We're not sure. Yeah. It's probably this guy, right? Maybe.
That's him.
That's Ugluk? All right.
Yes, that's him.
So more of those Howard Shore swells of music that aren't entirely rhythmic sounding, but still have a sense of forward momentum. One of his great tricks as a composer, and one of the reasons that I think he's such a brilliant addition to the Lord of the Rings storytelling, a way to make things sound compelling without sounding, like a contemporary rhythm section or something.
They're not exactly thematic, but I think they do pop up again in a couple of other places in this context.
I think they're all over the place. Yeah, exactly. That's just part of his language. I think that's part of why I love it so much.
Although the particular voicing of that from this composition, I think, is elsewhere.
Yeah.
So if you're listening on the complete recordings, you will hear some chorus in this piece, which wasn't used in the film.
Correct.
But we will find out
more about
that particular chord text a little bit later.
Here's our old 5-beat.
Wild.
Now there's going to be some really cool stuff happening with the 5-beat coming up here in terms of the way it impacts another theme.
Yes, and the way it lifts and changes.
Yes. So a little bit of the Fellowship theme. It is not as strong as it was in the Fellowship of the Ring, in the first score, but it still exists.
And because we only have 3 members of the Fellowship, it's all in 3/4.
That's true. And here we have kind of a little glimpse of some of the parallel fifth type of writing that you get for the dwarves. Just a semi-dwarvish variation.
That's one of my favorite little moments in the score.
The dwarf bit or this trumpet line?
Reedy dwarf moment.
Yeah. And again, it's the change in tone sort of gives it a very slight comedic element for the Gimli's grumbling, but it's so subtle and so carefully done. Some beautiful double reed playing for the leaf.
Some little hints at Aragorn's material as well.
Yeah.
I've been there to that exact location. I took red carpet tours in New Zealand. It took us there to that filming location. It was wonderful to be there.
Now we have our first story-specific bit of the Rohan music as they look out upon the plains. But it's brief, very short.
And that's the first time we hear it in the film, yes.
Yeah, other than the title card, yeah.
So if anyone has the rarities to hand, there is a track on there which has music from this sequence and a bunch of other scenes earlier in the film, but much more compressed and moved around than they are in the final cut. So the opening couple of reels did go through quite a bit of editing and reshuffling during scoring.
Yeah, just for clarity, the music does follow what form the film was in at that point in terms of editing. Yeah.
And
as we said earlier, there are different versions of almost everything in the first 40 minutes of Two Towers.
Yeah, this is where there was much more alternate music produced for Two Towers and the West for Fellowship of the Ring because the production was.
There was. It's one of those cases where everything was written out of order, and when the filmmakers went back and started to watch things sort of in context, there's often a need to just tweak things, pull things back, move things around. It's not hugely uncommon.
Two Towers production is where I started to visit Howard Shore's offices quite a bit more regularly, and I can remember I was there somewhat early in it would have been 2002, so the year that this would have been released, but it was probably still springtime or something. And they had a dry erase board in the office with just a giant Ents with a question mark on it, which I never asked what that meant, but it seemed like there were definitely some decisions being made at that time.
Indeed. And now here we see the industry of Isengard.
Yes, full strength.
We do, and the extended edition gets some nice new variations on the 5-beat pattern.
Yes,
really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's got that great sense of almost eternal rise in the shape of the overall Isengard theme. Each phrase digs deeper and deeper, but it has a sort of rise in volume and in outlook as it goes. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. This is sort of the same way that the Fellowship is not at their full strength. Isengard is now reaching their full strength. So you hear all that low brass with really no counterpoint. It's just the rhythm and the line. It's a very primitive style of music.
Here Saruman is getting allegiance with the wild men of Dunland.
Somebody's comment, they like seeing the reflection of the film in our glasses, Cliff. I should reflect that comment in my glasses.
This is our first Old English in the choral text.
That's right. So the language, we've used Tolkien languages for most of the other cultures in this for the choral music. Rohan, it is Old English, sort of a Beowulf type of connection here.
As their language is entirely Old English that Tolkien was so fascinated by.
That's right. That's right. And I think that was probably one of the easier bits for the choruses to deal with because they at least knew Old English. You know, they had to be quick studies on Elvish and Dwarvish and things like that. There's not really any precedent for that These days, though, some of these courses have done these bits so many times that they're getting to be experts on the Tolkien languages.
Right.
I think Renee Fleming commented on that at one point. Maybe that's in one of the documentaries as well. That, you know, operatic singers are quite proud of you know, getting a good German pronunciation, or they're very good at the French pronunciation, but having to learn Elvish was a new trick for them. Yeah.
It's on the documentary that came with the old limited edition Return of the King CD.
Here's a question. Yeah, that's right, Jim. Yeah. Are there any examples of mixing? Sorry to cut you off. I'm just getting a question.
No, go for it.
Any examples of mixing the 5/4 pulse of the evil themes with the tonality or melody of the quote unquote good themes like Rohan or Fellowship?
Yes.
Well, that's coming up very soon. Short answer is yes. There it is. And we're getting that shortly.
Here in this extended scene, they have just found the near dead body of the son of King Theoden. Theodred.
That's right. Which was another extended bit where they found him. Jim, is there anything in the hashtag that we can cover here as we have a?
We do have a brief
quiet
pause.
moment. Yeah. Do we have anything that might fit into this section?
We have some that we'll get to.
What do we think about about the taking the hobbits to Isengard? Can I be honest?
We'll do a commentary on that one later.
Oh, I have a very brief commentary with that. I hate that. But I've gone through my entire life with people making silly lyrics to things that I then can't get out of my head. So anytime that happens, it becomes an unwelcome earworm. So yeah, I don't listen to that very often. I don't listen to that. I don't listen to the potatoes. Are there others? I don't want to know. Don't send them to me. Don't at me, as the kids say. Jim, do we have any more intellectually stimulating questions?
I was just having a look at.
Okay.
There's a few things that we can touch on later.
Okay.
It's just turned into a very long list of questions. There was a question about the Moria flashback and why it was in a different key to the Bridge of Khazad-dûm sequence in Fellowship. But my gut feeling behind that one, it would be that the filmmakers wanted it to feel the same but slightly different.
Some of that too is just where it has to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, it has to, transitions. A question here, was the Eowyn theme ever meant to be more prolific? I would assume that means appear more often. But I mean, these things are all composed. No, they're composed to the film, to the story. So they're meant to, accompany the scenes that they accompany.
They are. We haven't really touched on Eowyn's material yet. There isn't really much sort of Rohan related thematic material in this sequence at all. That's all saved for a little bit later.
Yes.
But going back to the comment regarding the 5/4 material and Fellowship or other themes, we'll get something quite big in a couple of seconds, which will demonstrate that.
Yeah, I think my playback got slightly out of sync with yours, but I'm coming up to the scene right now where we have incredible statement and answer between Fellowship and Isengard all over the 5-beat. Mm-hmm. So yes, absolutely. The 5-beat pattern, especially in this score, is very, I used to call it virus-like, I think, back in the day, although these days that's not anything we want to think about if we don't have to. But it does sort of worm its way into other themes and take them over and dent them, so to speak.
It does, and it's still there in the Return of the King as well, even though Isengard is less of an influence by that stage of the story.
Maybe before we get to anything else too big here, I'm going to talk just a little bit about Howard Shore's process in composing these scores. So these, the way that Howard tended to work on these scores is he would attack the themes first. So he sort of set up themes almost in isolation. So not necessarily tied to specific sequences or events or anything like that, just character themes, or I guess I should say cultural themes and location themes, things like that. And then he would occasionally get into scoring sequences from the book in terms of I'm reading questions, but I'm not sure what they mean. So, but he would, these things were all really composed to picture for the most part. He would understand, what was coming up dramatically. The follow up on this was not the real theme, the early theme you mentioned in the book, the embryonic form. I think you're listening to what that theme is. I think these things are always done as developmental processes. So the real one is, it is what it is. Everything is sort of developed in a sort of step-by-step process. That's how a composer works. So there was a little bit back there of the nature theme kind of sneaking into that scene too, wasn't there? Which will become
there are a couple of different passes of that. There's a version that uses the end material as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But going back to your virus-like 5/4 material, this is all in 5/4 as well.
Yes, it is.
Often gets overlooked. We'll also get a sequence here where there's a quite significant piece of music removed from the final mix that you can hear on the complete recordings.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
And if you're lucky enough to see this performed live to projection.
Yeah, that's right. One of the more dissonant sequences in this score here is that horn writing is quite challenging.
Yeah, it's some wild stuff.
Yeah, those little intervals are just sort of spit out.
Somebody's been to a restaurant recently.
Here come the writers. So there's a little figure that's sort of associated with the writers of Rohan. It's not a very, structurally crucial theme. It doesn't come back a ton in the score, but there, excuse me, is a little figure that we associate with them. That was a night camp, and now we're getting on to the plains of Rohan. A little bit more of the writer's theme, these rising fifth type of figures in here. And some interesting rattles used there. Every once in a while, Howard will do that where there's something that sort of crosses the line that reminds you of sound effects, but it's actually part of the score. And that was a great example where it sort of feels like that shaking of the ground, the sense of the horses disturbing the earth.
Yeah, so it's a bass drum struck with a rattle.
That's right. A very large rattle, in fact.
I think there was a specific instruction in the score about the type of rattle.
There was. I can't remember what it was, but it was very descriptive.
I love the energy in the horns. This sudden arrival of Eomer's little quadrant of Rohirrim.
That's right.
I think it is perhaps more effective than the scene in An Unexpected Journey where Elrond and his cavalry encircle Bilbo and the dwarves. I must confess, I think this bit is far more effective. in producing the sense of threat.
Oh, they're certainly more outnumbered here. There's a little bit of a figure in there that relates to the Fellowship, but as they are in Rohan. Some of that horn writing that we just finished up is sort of a Fellowship variation that really only accompanies them when they're in Rohan, when they're here, and then again, I think you hear some at Helm's Deep later on. There's a sequence coming up here in Fangorn soon, and it's a great example of overlapping a ton of themes to help keep the storytelling straight. It's really quite masterfully done.
Mm.
We'll be on that shortly.
I have never seen more detail that the Weta people have provided for the armor and the helmets and the design of the horse heads on Eomer's shoulders. Until this 4K, I haven't seen this type of magnificent detail. It's crazy.
It's beautiful work. I've seen some of these helmets in person, and they're just as beautiful up close. It's great work.
We get to this influx where there's a crisscrossing of another layer of narrative with Merry and Pippin discovering Fangorn and a certain character within. At the same time, Howard and Peter have introduced Rohan and Theoden, and somebody else is going to come along soon. It just becomes a really wildly more complicated narrative place, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, Fellowship is such a linear story. There's a couple of moments where you cut away to this character, cut away to that character, but they're mostly kind of drawing a straight line through the narrative, both musically and cinematically. And here there's so many bits and pieces and new ideas and new developments. It's to me, this was the score where I felt I was beginning to understand what Howard is doing with the story, with the storytelling, I should say. I understood Fellowship certainly, but it's after you get into Two Towers and Return of the King, Fellowship feels like an overture in a lot of ways. This is where you really get the meat of the story and understand how these various languages, musical languages, all come together.
And yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And then there, Viggo Mortensen broke his foot. Famously.
Famously, yes. Do you remember if there were any particular moments that the orchestra itself had difficulty with, especially since several of the instruments are not commonly used? It's a good question, and they actually, in most of those cases, would do the recording with the orchestra first, and the less common instruments later.
Definitely.
Yeah. Fellowship was the only score they tried to do like some of the chorus and the orchestra together, but that didn't last very long.
Yeah, I think certainly for Two Towers, a lot of the Hardanger stuff is separate. That would be
Hardanger stuff is separate. The Witzel stuff is separate. The Rieta is separate. Yeah.
The Rieta is separate for good reason because it's quite an unpredictable instrument.
It's lethal.
We have hours of takes of Rieta.
Right, and we should clarify: it's not like alternate compositions. It's just one poor soul trying to control a Rieta. So we're getting some sort of tritone chords here from A to E flat. which represents a little bit of tree beard, a little premonition of tree beard coming up here.
I also have to correct the record. It was toes. He broke his toes, not his entire foot.
Oh no. Well,
but
I'm sure he didn't enjoy it much in either case.
no, of course not. And suddenly there's a very George Lucas swipe, a pan swipe with the edit, and then suddenly we're in Fangorn. I love it.
Sort of overlapping themes for the orcs here. We have some skip beat type of writing. We have, I think we call that the Mordor skip beat. We have the 5-beat pattern. We have that wonderful trumpet atop all of that. Rhythmically, a lot of things happening independently, and I think there's maybe a little bit of a reflection of the visuals here are much more dense in terms of all the the trees and just and there's more detail visually. So I think sonically it makes sense to sort of have counterpoint that's a little denser, but still in that sort of old, ancient type of style. It doesn't feel contemporary. We pause here.
Some little hints of the first use of wooden percussion in here as well.
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna get some
a little
great,
more prominent.
Yeah. Some aleatoric strings build up on a roll on the tam-tam there, and suddenly we're getting into the music of the Ents.
Yay!
So,
my favorite part.
Yeah. It's a good example too of how it is location-based storytelling, but they're careful with it. It didn't suddenly switch to Ent music the moment they got into Fangorn. We still had an orc to deal with. An orc dominated the scene, and really until this moment where Treebeard starts to walk and talk, it's something else. And now we're into the Ent music. So here we have a combination of bass marimba, log drums, and there's a bassoon solo that some versions of this were written for just a standard bassoon. Some of this was written for the contrabassoon, the lower bassoon. In fact, the lowest standard instrument of the orchestra, even lower than the big string basses. But all very, the wooden sounds of the instrument. If we had all that metal, the chains and all that for Isengard, now we have the wood. So as Jim was saying before, the contrast in the score are what often bring that clarity. We had metal, we have now wood.
And what kind of percussion is featured at the very end, where we find ourselves placed at the feet of Saruman / maybe somebody else?
We have log drum, which is a wonderful African instrument, and we have bass marimba. So if you're not familiar with the marimba, it's maybe similar to what one would picture in one's mind for the xylophone, a big wooden keyboard instrument, but it's larger, wider bars, thinner bars, and this one is larger yet. This goes down into the bass range, so that sort of hollow wooden echoing sound you hear there is a combination of log drums and some marimba.
Yeah. Doug knows his marimbas.
There's one right over there. It's next to the theremin.
There they are.
We're getting into the dead marshes soon, anyway.
It's wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
This is one of those sequences that's almost a little Cronenberg-esque in terms of Howard Shore's scoring.
It has those
very creepy stuff.
Yeah, those vocal glissandos or portamentos, more accurately, I suppose, since we're really bending the pitch.
Yeah, and all the Sprechstimme vocals too.
Right.
Where the chorus is effectively sort of speaking or whispering very quietly.
Yeah. The text here is The Dead Marshes, of course, by Philippa Boyens. And I think that the text here that they're sort of whispering and chanting and doing that Sprechstimme thing that Jim is referring to, that Schoenberg-esque type of performance. But the text translation is, the dead do not sleep here. They have found no rest, only a cold, dank grave to mark what they gave. To a great battle long ago, to a fruitless victory, to endless woe. One light for each life, one grave for every death.
So
Cheerful
something I'd forgotten was that you can hear Isabel Bayraktarian on this composition as well.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
We'll hear her more prominently later on when we get into the Arwen material.
She's doing the vocal portamento bits, isn't she?
She is, yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Portamento, for those who aren't familiar, it's splitting hairs, but we generally think of a glissando would be what a harp would do, or if you slide your keys along, or your fingers along the keys of a piano, so you are hitting each individual pitch one after another in a long sweep of notes. Portamento, you're technically bending the pitch, which is something you can do on, say, a string instrument or a singer or those type of things. So this is, if we're getting these things and using that form of the terminology, these would be portamentos. Of course, try convincing a trombone player that he's not really playing glisses, because they they tend to think of those like that.
Some little hints at a couple of notes of the history of the ring here, but again with the colours of Gollum.
Yes. This is an interesting question. Was the tonality of Treebeard's vocal performance integrated with the musicality of the score at all? It wasn't treated as an accompaniment in the sense of narrator and orchestra, but a composer for film does always have to be aware of all of the dialogue and the sound effects and the entire sound mix and where things will be audible. It's not all just purely creative choices. I think a harpsichord would sound here, and it would sound, be cool color, and these things all have to figure out where will they actually be audible with what's going on the screen, which these days becomes more and more challenging because the sound effects mixes have become quite dense in films these days.
They do. This sequence is a good example of that as well, because as Frodo falls in the water, the music is taken completely out of the mix. There's more to it. The complete piece is on the complete recordings, but in this case, the filmmakers decided to just let sound effects come to the fore.
Yes.
I think that's another piece that's restored for the live to projection performance.
That's correct. Yeah.
So as I think I touched on when we were talking about Fellowship, Two Towers probably has the most unused music of the three films, and for the live to projection performance, a lot of that has been restored.
Yeah, there's a big change at the end of the score, which I guess we'll talk about tomorrow, and it almost resulted in an alternate composition for the live performances, but ultimately was not to be the case.
And we can touch on a little bit of that, because some of that comes into the appearance of Gandalf the White in a few minutes.
True.
Creepiest music, and Peter Jackson indulging his most creepiest style here.
Most of this is actually in the film version here. This is all sort of sound design. It is not part of the score. In fact, we have a question here: was Shore involved in creating the ring's voice? And the answer is no. These sound effects bits were really done independently of Howard Shore's work. So a lot of the ring's voice, that squealing type of sound effects, I think Plan 9 may have been involved a bit in some of that stuff.
I think you might be right there.
Yeah, but definitely nothing that Howard Shore worked with. He's not involved with sound effects, just score.
Indeed. Well, most of the creepiest stuff is what I hear from Howard and the orchestra before Frodo falls in the water.
Ah, yes.
Really? But
yeah, fantastic writing.
I must admit, I hadn't thought about how Cronenberg-ish it might have been. I hadn't thought about that before.
It was, much more the type of writing that Howard had done. He wasn't known for the warmth of these scores. Although, in fairness, he had done a fair amount of that. Even big orchestral things that had creepy elements, like the fly. There's passages of great warmth in there. And
Yeah.
let us not forget, he did Big and Mrs. Doubtfire and family-friendly things like that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, people forget that all the time, that he sort of snuck these little family films in around the edges of the Cronenberg stuff.
So as I understand it, at one point while these films were being edited, the sequence that opens the Return of the King, the Smeagol Deagle flashback, was originally supposed to be here.
Yeah, that bounced around a little bit, absolutely. And I think it was here, and I think they made the right choice. I think it works better as an opener for Return of the King.
Indeed, it does. But my favorite thing about the extended Return of the King is the extra 13 or 14 minutes we get with Christopher Lee. I'm so grateful to have that back. But
I think he was too.
yeah, we'll get ahead of ourselves. We'll get to that later.
Get some very familiar stuff.
That's coming. It's coming. There's a composition, Wraiths on Wings. Yes. The text here is The Revelation of the Ring Wraiths, which is their standard text.
It's slightly altered in the mix here. I think some of the choruses moved around a bit, and some of the orchestra is dialed out. But
I think some of this, there's a big crescendo here that was aided a bit in the mix as well. I think that was sort of created editorially. It's another bit, as Jim has pointed out a few times, you can hear some of these things in their I don't know, I guess we would think of them as the more authentic guys in the live performances. The live performances were tricky things to figure out, because there certainly was the expectation of filmgoers that wanted to hear the music as it had been heard in the film. They wanted something that recreated that experience, but at the same time, people that were focused on the score knew that there were original versions of some of these things, and even some music that wasn't heard in the theatrical or home video releases. So it was a balancing act to figure out how to present that, and I think they did a wonderful job. A lot of thought went into those. A lot of legwork went into those too, because the scores are not prepared for that sort of usage after recording sessions. They're changed quite a bit at the podium. Things are cut out, things are moved around. They are absolutely awash in red pencil. So there was a lot of work to re-engrave everything and figure out which version of this had been used, which version of that had been used. It was a colossal effort.
That's impossible to me, how it could be understood, all the notations by hand, and then somebody has to go and plug that stuff into a music software to spit out a printed score that makes it look normal again. I just can't imagine doing it.
And this was also fairly early in the days where these companies had switched over to doing digital engraving. A lot of these things had still been done pen and ink until this point, which is more laborious, but certainly has its advantages, because you have your hands on it and you kind of know every single note that way. But as the computers are spitting these things out, it does make it a little trickier to sort of keep track of this take and that take and all that. And I think we're coming up to a section that Jim was talking about as it relates to the end of the film.
So there's a little bit of music missing from the final mix here. If you listen to the complete recordings, there's some wonderful sort of congested aleatoric material, just with an undercurrent of wooden percussion, which just brings across the atmosphere of Fangorn very, very well.
Yeah.
But again, I think here it's just sound effects.
A little bit of very quiet string writing in here too.
Yeah. Yeah, here you can hear the wood blocks, or the log drums rather.
Log drums coming in, yes, exactly. It's fantastic brass writing in there that's a little bit under the sound effects. You can hear that more on the albums and all that.
I love the way they bounce the dialogue between Christopher Lee and Ian McKellen.
Yeah, it was very well done, and it makes you realize how close their voices were to one another in terms of the sort of pitch.
So this is Gandalf the White in nature.
Yes, yes.
So there is an alternate version of this, which if you hang around for the fan club credits right at the end of the film, you'll get to hear, which is a more strident choral outburst. But ultimately they chose to go with something somewhat more subtle. Which
Yeah, I
was
think they wanted more of a...
originally written to go in the Helm's Deep sequence.
And ended up not being in the Helm's Deep sequence.
Not being in the Helm's Deep sequence. Also in the fan club credits and on the complete recordings, there's a fantastic composition that underscores this sequence.
Yes, that's right.
And now, back to the titanic battle of two Maiar spirits.
It's probably the last big budget film to use. Yes, that's right. Last big budget film to use the word smote in it. Good word, though. I probably used it in the book someplace. While we're paused here, we are trying to take questions. We're doing this live. So if you have any questions, we have a hashtag LOTR score questions, or my DMs are open and Jim's DMs are open. So if anything comes up, let us know. We're trying to cover everything, but sometimes people have very specific questions.
That moment there is one of my favorite moments in the score. When Gandalf remembers his name.
Yes, I'm here in the YouTube chat live with people. Ready to forward questions as well.
Yeah, Cliff, if you see anything in the YouTube chat, please let us know.
Absolutely.
Another little bit of extended material.
Yeah, this rhythmic writing as they leave Fangorn is it's a very Howard Shore type of writing as well. That they kind of clipped, syncopated writing. Gimli's really leaning into the accent in this scene. We do have a number of texts that we're using in this composition. We have the call, an Old English text. We have the fight, which was heard earlier in the Glamdring composition. And here we have a composition, the Marshes, as Shadowfax will appear shortly.
Whenever I see this sequence, I just think of that Radio City performance where everyone was applauding every horse.
Yes, but Shadowfax's applause was second to no other horse. That's clearly their favorite horse.
He is the most important horse.
it's like the children's book version of this, the most important horse. The text here is very specific to the on-screen action. It's Philippa Boyne's text again in Old English. In the distance they saw him, white sun caught his mane. Long they called him, but he would not come, for he was Shadowfax, lord of all horses, and he answered to only one. And what he answers to is Gandalf's beautiful whistling. And here he is.
The original single disc soundtrack album has an alternate composition for this sequence.
It does, it does. This scene is also the very favorite of our conductor's friend's wife. So Ludwig, who conducts all these live, his wife Beatrice is a wonderful horseback rider and is very taken with Shadowfax. So she always loves this moment. Although she's such an expert in horses, she can always tell when they cut to a different horse, like the stunt horse and all that, which I think she finds more distracting than we do. But Beatrice, if you're watching, I hope you enjoy this scene.
And finally, Gandalf has a theme.
Gandalf has a theme here, so it has that same down and back up shape that we hear stretched out for the Fellowship. Bum, bum, bum. It's just here. It's a little bit swifter, a little bit more, assertive, I guess I would say. And that is a theme for Gandalf the White, but it is really an offshoot of his participation in the Fellowship. Aragorn will have similar material later in the score, but it starts to show you how the Fellowship and belonging to the Fellowship affects these characters musically, thematically. An extremely cool idea to sort of bring about a dramatic subtext in music, or highlight it, I should say. Here we get into the dreams of trees.
This is actually my personal, mostest, favoritist additional material in any of the extended stuff, aside from having more Christopher Lee.
Oh, lovely.
But hearing Treebeard's poetry and this beautiful music here, it's just my favorite. I love it.
This is also, the Dreams of Trees. That's where we got the title. We do get a lot of variations on the Fellowship theme here that we sort of highlight in the themes section of the book, because they are themes. They are the Fellowship theme, sort of rendered in different ways. So again, it goes back to the question of what does one consider a theme, what does one not consider a theme? And I think ultimately it was less important musicologically than it was dramatically, or in terms of clarity. How do we make things make sense in this book so that we can help people to understand what these themes are and what these developments are? So as much as people get very caught up on the term theme, I think it's mostly just trying to find the easiest way to discuss this with people. This book was not made, I'm speaking of the music of the Lord of the Rings films, not just Tolkien's work, but my work on it, I did not want it to be only interesting to academics or professional musicians. These stories have so many fans, and I think it would be very unkind to sort of cut them out of the discussion of this music. So I try to find a way that would speak to all those groups in one way or another, which is a very, very tricky thing to do. There may have been more back and forth on my part on that aspect of the book than almost anything else, short of maybe the cover. It took us a long time to come up with the cover, but that was a major concern for us. We wanted to find a way that it would appeal to musically inclined, to academics, to fans, to adults, to young people, something that would really speak to the widespread appeal of these stories as well. Tolkien, of course, was himself an academic, but he didn't want these to be, stories by academics for academics. He certainly wanted to be able to speak to people. So I think there's a similar impulse from the filmmakers, certainly from the composer, and all the way down to my own little bits of work. I wanted to make sure that it appealed to everyone. The question about not using bits of music, is it a waste to throw out great music in a score like this? I'm sort of paraphrasing the question.
It's just what happens.
It's the nature of film music. Yeah, it's a collaborative thing.
It is.
And as I point out every time, so I apologize for the redundancy, any of these type of things throughout musical history where you are collaborating, there is compromise. If you're writing a symphony, it's very possible that you're going to have to compromise with those funding it. If you're writing a concerto, you'll have to talk to the performer and make sure all these things are doable. If you're writing a ballet, you compromise with the dancers. The story that I bring up time and time again, Wagner, who is known for his complete distaste for compromise of any kind, had to rewrite a few bars of his Fourth Ring opera to cover a bit of the set moving across the stage. He had to rewrite a passage. And in fact, he was not the first to rewrite that passage. His assistant rewrote it while he was out, and he had to come back and rewrite the rewrite. So that is the nature of art. That is the nature of collaboration. We always think of these things being assembled in our beautiful ivory towers and released to the world with the same choral burst that introduces Gandalf at Helm's Deep. But it's not how these things work.
It's not. It's not a situation unique to these films. There are countless other film music examples of music being written and either being thrown out or just changed or not ending up in
entire scores have been thrown out, haven't they? Beautiful entire scores have been thrown out.
Absolutely.
I think there was probably a good bit of music in these films that was reworked or not used, partially because of the extended post-production process. They were working on these things for a long time. Each score sort of occupied Hardshore for a year. So of course there's going to be take 1, take 2, take 3. You do drafts of things. And also they were, even by today's standards, these are very long films. And when you're creating a very long film or a very long film score, the question of balance is really paramount to almost anything else. It's easy to write 3 hours of loud, crazy music or quiet, whispering music. The secret is finding where is that comfortable balance with all this. Sometimes you don't notice that until it's all put together. Composers also themselves cut out enormous passages of beautiful music simply because it's too much for this section of the symphony or the concerto or the, what have you. So it's people like to imagine these dramatically combative situations, and it's sadly not quite as dramatic as we imagine it to be. It's just part of the process. It's a challenging line between being an enthusiast for music and a collector for music. A collector for music does want all the little unused bits and bobs and everything this was supposed to be like this, and this has 3 measures that are different, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's a specific and of course very valid outlook on these things, but I'm not sure that it is necessarily shared by those that create them. To them, the finished product is a more malleable thing. This is a good question. Could you talk? Oops, hold on. Could you talk a bit more about Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh's processes for writing the choral text? One thing I loved about the book was getting to read all of the choral translations. I don't know that I can say too much about their process, other than to say they are both hugely talented individuals in addition to their filmmaking prowess and their writing prowess, and Fran did a lot of the diegetic songs for this, but they have a wonderful sense of poetry as well, and sort of a Tolkien-esque sense of that. So they did most of these choral texts. Some of them are directly out of Tolkien. In fact, I think the one we passed a little while back, "The Call," which was heard in Gandalf the White, that's a Tolkien text, just translated by David Sallow. But yes, Philippa and Fran, they were on camera perhaps less than Peter Jackson in some of the documentaries and things like that. But in my mind, every bit as crucial to the beauty and success of these films. They're both of them brilliant. I've talked over a whole lot of music. Jim, did I miss anything crucial here?
I was just going to go back and say that we did actually finally get one of those 12-way string VCs in there.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, well, we're getting close to the gate. Things get a little bit more ominous, right?
There's a lot going on in this composition. This is very intricate and very notey, and
yes.
You don't necessarily notice, but it's a very busy piece of music that just very subtly keeps the energy up in the background.
Yeah, Howard has an incredible gift for writing really coherent pieces of music that seem at a distance to be just sort of one long shape, but have so much detail under the hood. It's unbelievable.
There's some lovely sort of winding string and woodwind lines in here. It's almost a little bit like some of the neo-Baroque stuff he does in things like the Aviator and
Aviator, yes, yeah. Well, that came right after the Ring scores, didn't it?
Yes.
If you're not familiar with the Aviator, do yourself a favor sometime over the holidays and listen to Howard Shore's work, that great film by Martin Scorsese.
That's another example of the best piece of music in the score not being in the film.
That's true. Though I think if one digs around online long enough, one may be able to find it resynchronized to the film. But of course, I wouldn't know for sure.
And the extra goodies continue, having turned ourselves away from the Black Gate with Gollum's good advice. Now we get all this extra Merry and Pippin stuff, which for a lot of fans replaces the old man Willow who was attacking the hobbits in the old forest in the book. And that takes us to the Tom Bombadil thing. Peter wanted to give some fan service to that part of the story, so he put it in the sequence here. But again, without Tom Bombadil anywhere.
You'll also notice that we finally get the whistle back on some of the Hobbit music here. This is really pretty much a purely comedic scene until they get caught up in the tree here. So it's a time to sort of return very briefly to the lightheartedness of the Shire.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are joining us, we are about 1 hour and 9 minutes into the runtime of The Two Towers. And thank you for joining us, everybody. There's some Hobbity mischief here to manage, is there not?
There it is.
Some of this Hobbity mischief material will come back later when we see Merry and Pippin at the end of the film.
That's right. That's right. I kept expecting this this height thing to pay off at some point. Only one of them can reach the doorbell at Isengard or something. Another Martin Scorsese score that this is similar to is Howard Shore's beautiful work on Hugo. Some of this playful music here probably is in a similar style. But here we get a little bit darker, and we're kind of getting closer to some of that Ent music. Not quite there, I suppose, but it's in that vein.
Yeah, it's almost a pulse in the background.
Yeah. A little bit of Ent theme, a little bit of Hobbit's antics is what we call the build up into this.
Now you know what happens to the orcs and the Uruk-hai at the end of this film, but that's not yet.
It looks like an awful way to go.
I'll say.
Thanks to all the people who are sending in questions today. There really are some very great questions. It's giving us a lot to chew on. So if you have any more, hashtag LOTR score questions, or my DMs are open. It's at Doug Adams Music, and Jim's DMs are open as well at Jim J. Ware.
We have a couple of questions on some Aowen and Worm Tongue, which we'll get to in a few minutes.
Oh, okay. And I believe Cliff is monitoring the YouTube comments.
Yes, indeed.
Jim, I was reading the YouTube comments after the fact from the last two. They said you looked more awake in the second installment of Fellowship than in the first. So just so you're aware.
So is that because I changed camera and upped the production values?
It's possible, yeah. It's a technical thing.
Everyone in the YouTube chat has correctly identified Pippin, who's at fault for everything that's happened. It's not Frodo's fault, it's Pippin's fault.
Or Pippin.
And everything that happens with the tree and the skeleton in Moria and all the bloody hell that's going, it's all Pippin's fault. And I'm really glad that the YouTube chatters finally got it right. Fool of a soup.
Doesn't Pippin have the idea to lead Treebeard back toward Isengard eventually?
Bingo.
Ah,
Bingo.
see? Lay off Pippin, everyone. A little bit of an echo of a weakened Fellowship theme as they near the Golden Hall.
Ah, yes. Stephen O is asking, is there any plans for the complete recordings being released in one big boxed set? I don't I don't imagine so.
No, I don't think so. That would be an awfully big box set. Of course, such a thing would be possible, but yeah, I don't think so. In fact, I'm hoping that they re-release them into 3 individual box sets at some point, because I think they are once again selling out or sold out. Jim, do you know off the top of your head?
They are currently not available. They're challenging sets to produce. They have quite complex, expensive packaging, and they tend to fall out of print very quickly, which is somewhat disappointing. However, they are all available digitally. They are on various streaming platforms if people feel they can't wait for a physical release. But it would be nice to get them back out there again at some point in the not too distant future.
The book, happily, is still in print, however, so
that still comes with a CD.
And it still comes with, yes, good old physical media.
Creepy worm tongue, creepy.
Yeah. Worm tongue with the same hairstyle I'm going to have if this quarantine doesn't end soon.
So Wormtongue does have a little motif associated with him, but I don't think we hear it here.
It does?
No, it comes a bit later, and then once he gets back, yeah.
Yeah, there is another statement that's just in the extended version.
Yeah. Brad Dourif is fantastic. Yeah. Everything. He's Chucky, isn't he?
Mm.
Yeah. I can remember. I don't. The question was, did Howard Shore know the cast beforehand, and did that influence anything? Howard Shore is sort of like the old 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game, where he's worked with everybody and knows everybody, and through his filmmaking, he scored films for Tom Hanks, for Al Pacino, for Martin Scorsese. He worked on Saturday Night Live. And to his everlasting credit, everything I ever heard him talk about on these films while they were in production was character names and places. There was never a reference to when Sean does this, it's when Sam does this. When production ended, he went back to actors' names and, what he knew about them as people and all that sort of thing, because of course you meet everybody when you work on these things. But in production, he was completely ensconced in the world of Middle Earth, which is very cool.
This is probably our first really prominent use of the Hardanger fiddle.
The Hardanger fiddle, that's right. Dermot McCrean performing this. Wonderful Irish fiddle player. And this would be a good example of a situation where the orchestra would have recorded this and Dermot would have come in later. They actually set up similar to what we have, headphones on with one ear out to the room and one ear covered by the headphone, and would hear the orchestra's playback and have his sheet music in front of him, play along and synchronize it.
Have a Peter Jackson musical cameo coming up.
Which is not on the complete recordings.
It is not.
Peter Jackson recorded a tam-tam here, which is, again, what we usually think of as a gong. As we see the Golden Hall, he recorded that wild, meaning not as part of the orchestra, not as a recording session, just as sort of a sound effect. And they layered it in there, but it is not actually part of the proper score. So it is not used in live performances or albums or anything like that. But he did get a little lesson in tam-tam playing, which was kind of cool.
We do have it. It's a future rarity, maybe.
How many takes do we have of that? There are a few.
There are a few.
Yeah.
We have the orchestra playing Happy Birthday for Peter Jackson's birthday in 2003 as well.
That's right. That's right.
the Wormtongue's material is in here, isn't it?
Yes.
It's just that sort of slightly halting figure in the low strings and the low.
Yeah, a little grunting bit. Yeah. The question was, were there any sort of practical jokes, or did Howard Shore do any of that sort of stuff during the recording sessions? I think there was a bit of banter with the orchestra between takes and things like that, but he is it's very important to him that an orchestra and these performers be treated with great respect. They are giving performances, so there's a certain headspace that one needs to be in to sort of perform these things with the sort of technical prowess and authenticity that they wanted out of it. So I think it was important to him to not, have it be a yuck fest between takes and everyone has to buckle down and play the music. He wanted to set a certain tone. And he's not a stuffy guy. Howard's a very funny guy, but it was important to him in these recording sessions that there was an air of consideration for the performers.
There is one moment where someone's mobile phone rings just before a performance of the lighting of the beacons, and I think Howard threatens to fine the orchestra.
That's true. Yeah, Howard has a wonderful dry sense of humor. I'm sure I probably quote him on at least a weekly basis still to this day. But when he's on, he's on. It's work time when it's work time.
So we're back into the choral text, The Fight. Yeah.
Yes.
Which first popped up at the very beginning of the film. And again, everything is
again
in
with
5/4.
the Matana. Yes. Yeah. Right. Showing Saruman's influence even when we have no characters from Isengard directly in this scene, perhaps magically in this scene, but.
I must admit, it was really an extraordinary day to be visiting the set. I was there visiting as a planted spy for the OneRing.net, and I was there on location that day where they were filming this scene with the healing of Theodred.
It's an iconic scene. Fantastic. Yeah. So this piece that plays here, this is probably as close as we get to what Howard's original draft of the Rohan theme was. We put some of the early drafts of these themes on the Rarities album just to show what they sounded like before they were drawn into dramatic usage. They were just the themes by themselves. But this is actually very close to the sort of sketch version of this theme, and there's such a long open stretch of dialogue and looks and quiet moments. They're able to do a nice long melodic statement here, so it fit right into it.
It's probably the grandest, most optimistic statement of the Rohan theme. Rather like the fellowship statement at the end of the Council of Elrond. We won't hear it in this guise again.
No, quite right. And we should point out when these themes, we talk about them having sort of their grandest moments. They do have large epic moments, certainly in Return of the King, but they are maybe more purpose-driven. These are these themes sort of in repose in a way, because we do hear enormous statements of fellowship and Rohan in the third score in Return of the King.
That's an excellent way of describing it.
Hmm. Somebody pointed out online, and maybe it was an old comment that I just discovered in this past year, but this is a great example of really looking forward in the plot. This is the moment when Wormtongue gets a very good look at Aragorn's ring, which he'll describe in a couple of scenes later.
Mm-hmm.
You can see him reach his hand out, and he
Mm.
sees that ring. So they do think these things out. There.
It's
Spits
been a
on it.
while. It's been a while since I've watched the extended editions all the way through until the 4K discs arrived, and I'd forgotten that there are loads of little shots and moments like that that have been restored that I'd completely forgotten about.
Yeah.
Remarkable. This place, Mount Sunday on the South Island, very remote location. Insane how windy and cold it is there all the bloody time. Now,
There's a question here. I think you've quoted a cor anglais player in your book saying Shore is really good at writing for the cor anglais. What does that mean? Are some keys easier to play than others? No, it's not key. Well, I mean, it is true. Certainly, some keys are easier to play on certain instruments than others. But I think it's understanding how certain instruments get around certain things. You know, different instruments have the ability to leap or move stepwise, or they're particularly good in certain ranges, or you don't want to write something that's very articulate in a low range or in a high range, or you don't want to write something that's very legato in certain ranges. There's just certain things that speak better than others. There are certain notes on certain instruments that are notoriously out of tune. There are still, Beethoven bassoon passages that people are still trying to figure out how to play in tune to this day. So Howard has a wonderful sense of what these instruments can do technically, where they're comfortable, and who the performers are. He was very careful in these scores to try to use the same players all the time because he knew what they sounded beautiful doing. So he didn't just write a trumpet one part, he wrote a part for a specific player. He knew what he would sound like in this range, in this key, on this instrument. They change certain instruments at certain times.
And just expanding on that a little bit, when recording a film score, there's often orchestras of different sizes. You may have an A orchestra, a B orchestra, and a C orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
But for these films, they had the entire orchestra present at every session,
which is
hugely expensive.
It's hugely expensive. I was going to say it's a real vote of confidence from the post-production team that they would do that, because the reason you have an A orchestra, B orchestra, C orchestra is largely due to trying to keep that budget under control. If you have a day where we're probably going to spend most of this day doing a really simple piece. Well, let's bring in, we have a piece where it's under dialogue, it's a lot of whole notes, it's sort of tonal and simple. We'll bring in the C orchestra. They'll probably be able to handle that one just fine. We don't need to pay for the more expensive players or the entire ensemble or something like that. And they didn't do that with Lord of the Rings. They made sure they had the finest players with them at all times and all instruments. Give them options if we suddenly decided this viola line would sound better as a bassoon solo. Well, you have the bassoon player there. You didn't tell him to take the day off because you didn't think you needed him. So that sort of support from a filmmaking community is a very rare and very beautiful thing.
We have just passed by one of my favorite vocal elements with Miranda Otto singing at the grave of her cousin, Theodred.
That's another Philippa Boyan's text, an old English text. We have that in the book as well.
It's extraordinary. And it leads up to this gorgeous bit of grief and reflection. It's really extraordinary.
Did Howard Shore write the Lament for Theodred or the Funeral of Theodred? Yeah, that's all his music in there. But he knew in advance that some of these things would not be in the theatrical editions and that they would be back for extended cuts. So it's again one of those things that is part of the job as a film composer. You know that ultimately you're serving the film, serving the storytelling, and things will happen.
Just to just correct you slightly,
Oh,
there, Doug. The melody that Eowyn is singing.
I was talking about the composition. Yeah,
it's Plan 9. The orchestral bit underneath is Shadowfax.
Sorry, I should have clarified. Yes, the cue. We hate to use the word cue, but that composition is a Howard Shore composition with a Plan 9 melody inserted into the middle of it. Yes.
Hmm.
Trying to think, there was in the Lord of the Rings films, how much of the diegetic music was composed by Howard Shore? A little bit in the Hobbit film.
There is
while they're having dinner in Rivendell, and the dwarves are having the food fight. But yeah. Did Howard Shore ever? Sorry, Justin, is your voice coming through, or should I repeat things? Repeat it. Okay, sorry. Talking to our producer. So the question was: was Howard Shore ever? Did he ever request to be on set for certain scenes to sort of? It would help him deal with certain scenes by being there. No, I don't think he actually did. He wasn't in New Zealand all that much for these. He was certainly there, and he was certainly there, a considerable amount. But much of his work was really done in England, and in New York prior to England. He was in New Zealand a good bit, certainly more than certainly more than I. But I'm trying to think. He wasn't on the set all that much. He certainly was on the Rohan set at one point, because we will see him when we get to the Return of the King. I'm not sure if people realize that or not, but he does have a cameo that he was sort of coerced into doing. And
the fans on YouTube are already in anticipation, speaking about it. Yes.
About his cameo, yeah, he referred to that as the worst acting he had ever seen on camera. He was very, very critical of his own acting skills, but he's certainly more convincing as a writer of Rohan than he was as a nurse on Saturday Night Live. So that's okay.
Funny.
This is the second most important horse in the film.
Yes. We join Jim and I as we do another commentary, just ranking the horses from these movies. We'll do that. That's next year's project.
I'd love to do that. I suspect that someone has probably beaten us to it.
It's probably true.
I believe this is an added scene.
I think you were correct. That's right. And we should point out we had some more Gandalf the White music back there, didn't we?
We did.
Yes. Again, hearing that connection between Gandalf and the Fellowship.
There's the YouTube chat has identified Aragorn and Brago's love theme that Howard never told you, Doug. He never told you that he wrote that.
And I can't tell you how glad I am that he didn't mention that.
Well, I'm usually the person in the room who makes the joke, oh, you thought you were kissing Liv Tyler. When we get to that bit that's coming up, I'm usually the one who keeps saying, then it was a good dream.
I love that transition to Isengard there, those little stabs of brass. It's just a nice way to sort of seize that brief moment.
A little more of Wormtongue's material in here.
Quite right, yes, exactly.
There was a question asking about whether Wormtongue's material was related to the ring material, but I think that's just coincidental.
I think that's just coincidental.
I don't think there's any specific relationship
there. No, and I'm not sure, at least in terms of the filmic storytelling, there's no great desire of Wormtongue to claim the ring for himself or anything like that.
What else we have? Was the Riders of Rohan theme ever meant to be more prolific?
No, I don't think
no,
so.
No, not necessarily. I mean, there was originally a little more of it hinted at in the night camp sequence earlier, I suppose. But I don't think it was due to pop up anywhere else.
No. And some of these thematic bits, it's some themes are set up in advance and then applied to the scenes. And sometimes you write a scene and realize you have a figure that would do well to reappear in a later scene to sort of show a connection between the two scenes. I don't know it for a fact, but I strongly suspect that the Riders of Rohan is one such example where it was sort of written into a scene, and then brought back in a subsequent scene to sort of help show a through line there.
There's another question that kind of leads on from that. There was a comment about Howard Shore using rising minor scales to a ridiculous degree, which is not necessarily a motivic thing. That's more just a Howard Shore thing.
Fingerprints, yeah. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
Composers there's a reason that we can identify Mozart a few bars in. There's a reason we can identify Sibelius a few bars in. Composers have gestures and fingerprints and things that they use that represent their musical personalities. And I think those types of minor scale devices are absolutely part of what makes Howard Shore sounds like Howard Shore. There's a reason that these scores don't sound like they were written by 27 different people. They all sound like they were the work of one musical mind. And that is why, because they were.
There's some good statements of the first of Eowyn's themes back there.
Yes.
She does get quite a few different little bits and pieces over the coming films. And the Rohan theme is starting to sound a bit more weary and believable.
Frail, yeah. This would be in the hands of lesser storytellers, that pullback there would be a great moment to have a huge orchestral swell and we'll let the horns carry the theme. But it's more important to the storytelling here to show the frailty of this culture, and that's what they opted for instead. One of the better instances of accompaniment for eyebrows.
Wow, the plot thickens.
Here we have Gollum's goofier side just starting to come out at this middle section of the film, and we almost did get Gollum singing onto one of the albums at one point, but it did not come to pass. I'll tell you about that tomorrow, where we almost had some lovely Gollum vocals on the album.
Really?
Yeah.
It's
probably better that we didn't.
Referring to him as Smeagol, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah, he's definitely more in Smeagol mode here. Yeah. See, that's a great spot there to show the subtlety of Howard's scoring, the way that the high strings entered on Frodo's turn there. Give it just a little chill down the spine. It's not a big orchestral sting that adds too much weight to it. Just a change in color. Just gets a little cold there.
Sometimes with Howard Shore's music, it almost feels like it's not quite synchronized to the picture at first glance, but when you start looking into the detail, it's incredibly specific.
Yeah, Yeah, it's like the world's most subtle ballet. It's
Mhm.
every motion is accompanied, but in such a delicate way.
And this is by far the most famous last minute scene, as Peter Jackson described it. The very surprise that this was written and directed by Fran
By
in
Fran,
another
yeah.
little box in a unit somewhere because he was too busy doing many other things. And this happens to be the absolute backbone of Smeagol Gollum's brilliance in this film. And here it is, by accident.
And another testament to the absolute brilliance of Fran Walsh.
Yes,
The woman can do anything. She's incredible.
yes.
Fran was at the recording sessions in London, well, in Watford when I was there. But she keeps her distance. She's a very private person, and so I made no attempts to sort of approach her or bother her in any way. But we had some lovely email exchanges after this was all done. And in addition to being incredibly talented in many fields, she's really a wonderfully kind person. It's interesting that this the scene, I think, isn't scored like a battle between the pity and menace themes of Gollum. Um, it's once again, if we're writing this as a standalone piece of music, that might be an interesting approach to things. But in terms of storytelling, this scene is all about dialogue and quiet and really literally introspection. Um, so the
Yes.
composer has to be. Themes are very important in musical storytelling, but the most important is the drama. Um, I think when the themes and the drama work together to make something coherent, that's where it becomes art rather than just a product. And that's a great example. The themes there would have been lovely and interesting from a musical standpoint. They would not have told that story particularly well. Um, so he chose the drama there. There are other times where those themes can argue with one another and have their profound statements. So storytelling and composition is very often an act of restraint. Um, we
Mm.
choose as composers, we choose where the rests are as well. We must never forget that.
There is a fun little composition not used in the
Yeah,
film when Gollum delivers the rabbits.
contrabass clarinet,
Yes,
and that one is back in the live performances.
it is. It is. It's on the
Yeah,
complete recordings as well.
yes, that's right.
There is such a thing as a contrabass clarinet. Tell me more. Wow.
It is, yes, a very low single reed instrument. Absolutely rattles your bones when you hear it. And it was kind of perfect here for uh, again getting into Gollum's physicality, but adding a little more humor to it. It was if he had just, for example, used only the cimbalum or something, there might have been too much twitchiness and weirdness and a connection to the earlier darkness to let the comedy play. So he kept the cimbalum in there, he kept the pizzicato in there, but he added contrabass clarinet and just that little addition of that strange low woodwind color made it a little bit funny.
It's Hobbit material as well, so it's
Yeah.
Gollum's
Right.
take on Hobbit thematic material.
That's right. Well, that's probably Gollum at his most Hobbit-like in these films, right? I mean, he seems to have a strange strange approach to his food, but he still likes his food. An interesting instrument coming up in here, a dilruba.
which is a bowed sitar, I think.
Yes, right. So this is another example of a creature, a Middle Earth creature, that's given not a theme, but a sort of unique color to make it stand out in the context of the score. So similar to the way that the cave troll or the watcher in the water, things like that, where they don't have a theme that comes back, but they do have a specific musical device or specific musical color. So again, here we have the dilruba, we have harps sort of glissandoing in a different key from the rest of the orchestra. It's just very hazy and mysterious. And I mean, what a great bit of restraint from Howard and from the filmmakers that you could easily have gone with, massive tuba solo or something that shows the great weight and size of these of the Mumakil. But instead they played it all from the Hobbit's point of view, wonderment. It's not just the physical property of these things.
Fantastic. And there's David Wenham.
There he is. And certainly the Mumakil do get their big, weighty, ponderous orchestrations, but you have to wait till Return of the King for that, where it's more appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
It also allows them to make two different entrances into the storytelling, neither of which then feels redundant. Here it's the mystery entrance when they arrive at the Fields of Pelennor. It's the weighty, ominous, heavy, bad news introduction.
A point of narrative interest, the dialogue that Faramir has, trying to figure out whether the young man from the Southron armies has any evil at heart, or whether he was just manipulated and lied to by other powers to make him go wander so far from home. That was all originally dialogue inside Samwise's head. It was on Sam's internal dialogue from the book.
That's right. Transplanted dialogue.
And it cuts to the core of any argument that anybody could ever have about whether, the white people are the saviors of this story and that all the dark-skinned people are evil by nature. It just completely shoots that theory to pieces to anybody who's ever been so unfortunate as to hold that point of view over Tolkien's storytelling. And with that final button,
we are at the intermission.
We are at the intermission yeah.
At 1 hour and 46, almost 1 hour and 46, 1 hour 45 minutes. How about that? There is so much brought to the stage, and the device of using the Oliphant, the Mumakil, in a very sparse way in this little scene, in no way destroys it. When they reappear in Return of the King, it's really, really impressive and wild that Peter used them with such restraint here in the Return of the King. Very judicious use of them. Let's talk about the score. At this point, wow, we have just been reintroduced to the Fellowship theme and the Shire, and we've been brought almost a wild platter, a banquet of new characters, new themes, new musical territory to cover. It's exhausting. How did we get this far? Wow.
Well, yeah, I mean, we haven't really had elves to deal with. We've had a tiny bit of dwarvish color, but really not very much. There's not much in these scores. But we've gotten into the world of men, which makes a big difference. The Isengard music, the Ents music, the Shire music, when it first appears in Fellowship, it feels like it's the entire world. It almost feels like, well, maybe this is the theme for Middle Earth. And when you realize that it's just a specific corner of Middle Earth, it really makes the way you view that theme, it puts it in a different light, I think. Contrasts are so important to this score, to storytelling in general, but really to these scores, the way they're constructed.
And talking of contrast, we get our first proper look at Gondor coming up in the second half of the extended 2 hours.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that, Jim. Thank you. There hasn't been a single tiny speck, not one iota of any Gondorian theme that we've heard trickle in so far.
Not in Two Towers. You had it in Fellowship of the Ring. We had 2 instances of some Gondor material in there, and those 2 will be back soon. But
yes,
wait till tomorrow.
Wow, how exciting! Well, this is it. This is great. So, for programming note, this is housekeeping. We need to tell our audience that tomorrow we will be live streaming the Two Towers Disc 2, the second half of the extended edition. We're still on schedule for about the same time, aren't we, gentlemen? Tomorrow?
Yes.
We'll try to do it a little bit earlier tomorrow.
I will actually be on time tomorrow.
No, that's okay.
Jim, I'll call you. It'll be fine.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to say that we're probably going to pick things up at about 12 noon Pacific time, which is 3 p.m. in the afternoon on the East Coast for those who are measuring world time. Right now, we're at about 10:30 London time, aren't we? About 10:30 p.m.
Just coming up to 10:32. Yeah.
Yeah, just coming up. So, wow. Yeah. So, adjust your clocks and your calendars, my friends. We're going to do this tomorrow as our exciting journey of musical discovery goes even further forward into new places. Oh my gosh, Helm's Deep is coming up. Wow. I've been so fixated on the Treebeard music and the strange instrumentations of Fangorn and Gollum schizophrenia. I almost completely forgot that Helm's Deep is coming up. Wow, how exciting.
A lot of big stuff tomorrow, that's right.
So everyone, thank you. It's a great success to have you here with us. Thank you, gentlemen, and to the audience who has been so inquisitive and so lively. It's really great. You know, everyone says, oh, I'm in Sweden just 1 hour later. We have the Scandinavian countries tuning in late. This is exciting. It's very, very lovely. What a great crowd we're gathering, and what a wonderful way to spend our Christmas holiday weekend as our family comes together around the campfire and listen to some wonderful music. It's great.
Yeah, it's great. It's fun to do. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this. A little trip down memory lane, I think. Yeah.
We're gonna
absolutely. Yeah, no, perfectly timed now that everyone had some nice 4K discs under their Christmas trees.
Yes.
Indeed. It's wonderful. You can follow Jim online at Jim J. Ware. That's a W-A-R-E. And you can also find Doug at Doug Adams Music. Is that right?
That's correct.
And myself, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at QuickBeam2000. Obviously, why I'm taking such a keen interest in the Fangorn music. So my Entish pedigree still has been my nickname on the One Ring for 20 years. It's been a wonderful time. And Justin, are you still there in the background? I want to say thank you and a tip of the hat to you, sir, for running all this technical stuff for us. Thank you. Is he there? Uh-oh.
Oh, no.
He better be there, because
who's steering the ship now?
we're not going offline unless he's actually there.
He's
there. All right. So, all right, good. Then we're ready to say good night and good luck. Everyone, stay safe, relax. It's going to be a beautiful Sunday night, and we will see you all tomorrow, which is December 28th at 12 noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern. Check your local listings around the world. Until then, buenas noches y buena suerte. We'll see you all tomorrow.